And we're live. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of Endeavour News. I'm Hector, and I'm here with my co-host Gilbert.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
And I'm also here with our very first ever guest, Aarvoll.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for coming on. And I will give it to Gilbert because he's got an intro prepared.
All right, excellent. So, Aarvoll is a Christian Platonist philosopher and educator, sharing knowledge and his insights on a generous breadth of topics, including but not limited to Atlantology, genetics, anthropology, and much, much more. He has a YouTube, X, and a Substack, aarvoll.substack.com, where he shares all his content. As well as being a philosopher and an author, he also heads the organization Return to the Land, which you can find at returntotheland.org, where you can find out more about the kind of work that he does. Okay.
Yeah,
Is
we've
that a
got all
fair
his links
description?
below, by the way. So if you want to find Aarvoll, make sure you check out his links. Thanks for being on. How have you been this morning? Or this afternoon, I suppose it is for you.
Well, I was doing some maintenance on the tractor, so
Yeah,
uh,
Oh, cool.
just the
fair
usual
enough.
kind of work.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Important work. I guess that will sort of lead
By the
into
way,
it.
that Substack is not very active, and I wouldn't describe myself as a writer. I
Okay.
kind of subscribe to Socrates and Pythagoras's philosophy on writing. I prefer the spoken word.
Of course. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Spoken is much better. Only nerds read, like me. Um, but no, that's great. What kind of tractor do you have? Just out of curiosity, is it the old 1980s one or?
No, it's well, I bought a Korean tractor. Coyote is the brand.
Oh, okay.
It was new, but
Oh, I heard,
Oh,
isn't there like that thing that's been happening recently with like John Deere needing you to like get updates for your tractor, otherwise it won't run
yeah,
or something? I remember hearing something like that.
yeah.
no, I don't know about that. Just replaced fuel filter, oil filter, stuff like that.
Oh, cool, cool, interesting. Yeah, Coyote. It kind of sounds like yeah, like a Tamagotchi or thing. It's interesting that they would call
Hmm.
a tractor brand that. So, but they are Korean after all. So, anyway, so yeah, cool, awesome. Uh, Aarvoll, why don't you begin by giving us a brief explanation on what Christian Platonism is and why you deem it necessary to have a synthesis between the two, i.e., Christianity and Platonism.
Yeah, sure. So, most of the church fathers leaned towards Platonism as far as the available philosophical schools of antiquity went. Several were explicitly Platonists prior to conversion. Some continued to describe themselves as Platonists after conversion. In the past, I mean, the Christian church wasn't as strict about particular dogmas like the eternity of the world versus a creation of the world in time or the pre-existence of the soul and things like that. So in the early days, Christians could subscribe to more Platonic doctrines, and that was pretty common. Um, Around the 6th, 7th centuries AD, there was a shift as the Byzantine Empire took over the Platonic schools towards a kind of outward facing Aristotelianism. Aristotle's writings are not as offensive to Christians intrinsically because Aristotle doesn't mention the pagan gods, whereas Plato does. And some of the late Neoplatonists had kind of already reconciled Plato's philosophy with Aristotle's philosophy. So I think the church elders at the time made the call that it was better optics to look like Aristotelians while still remaining true to this overall Platonic philosophy, which is what the church was kind of raised in. Um, you know, before even Christianity, Philo of Alexandria, the Platonist Jew, was influential, and many early Christians were inspired by Philo's philosophy. So Platonism has cut through the history of Christianity through the scholastic period. I mean, Thomas Aquinas. Some people now are describing as more a Neoplatonist than really an Aristotelian. And there are still people who describe themselves as Christian Platonists today. I'm kind of different in that I philosophically speaking, lean much more heavily towards Platonism. And I see a lot of kind of compromises and um, a bit of incoherence that's crept into Christian dogma by straying away from that Platonic source. Christians will admit that Plato constitutes a kind of proto-evangelion, preparing the way for the Christian worldview. But Plato had the idea that when ideas enter into history, the first entrance of them is the most potent, and then everything after that kind of takes its power from that first instantiation, sort of like a magnet, and then a train of iron filings that all kind of fall into line. He goes into that in the dialogue, the Ion. So anyway, I think that's true. And, Platonism is also just coherent in its own right. It doesn't really require dogma. Like, you can rationally believe everything in the Platonic worldview. And it's also astonishing how much of it has held up to thousands of years of scientific development. Unless you really insist on reading kind of the face value of the text, most of Plato's core claims, I think, are still tenable today. And there are physicists and all sorts of intelligent people who still describe themselves as Platonists. So I think Christianity can become more coherent, more palatable in a scientific worldview if it re-embraces its roots in Platonism.
Okay, so really, Platonism was just the natural compound to Christianity all along, especially as, Europe and the West was kind of the birthplace of Christianity and, of course, Plato. So it's just that these kind of naturally go together, and it's necessary to have these both together in Western man's understanding, because well, let's see, they complement each other, and they work well together, and this is kind of the direction we need to go. And if we are to sort of rebirth this ourselves in our minds as Western people, the psychology of ourselves as European Western people, this is kind of the thinking that we need to imbue inside of ourselves. Would that be accurate? Or
Sure. Well, I mean, we need a coherent, true philosophy, and we need true religion. And as far as philosophy goes, Platonism has held up better than any other school in history, and it still is doing stuff. People are still Platonists that come up with interesting things. Like Michael Levin is this biologist. He considers himself a Platonist, and he's doing definitely some of the most radical, like groundbreaking stuff in biology. I consider him one of the greatest living philosophers, even though he's a biologist. Or Roger Penrose or stuff like that. So it's just the best that we have to work with. I mean, if someone wants to argue for another philosophical worldview, I'll debate anybody defending Platonism. And then when it comes to religion, okay, it's Christianity or what? Christianity, the symbolism of it is coherent with the Platonic worldview. It's demonstrated that historically, and I can make separate arguments for the natural fittedness of the two systems. And also the ethics have served us well. We became the most powerful civilization in the history of the world with Christianity, and Christians, by all metrics, are better off psychologically, morally today than non-Christians. So let's just go ahead and stick with that.
Just to add to something you said, just to clarify for the viewers, when you say that Platonism is the true philosophy, do you mind just going into a few sort of examples why that is the case?
Right. Well, Plato's real innovation. So I consider Platonism in line with the perennial philosophy more broadly. And I believe that began with the Upanishads. That's the beginning of philosophical thought. Prior to that, you have mythological thought and some beginnings of philosophy in Egypt around 1300 BC. But then around 1000 BC, in the Indian tradition, you have the Upanishads. These are philosophical dialogues. Of course, they're consonant with the previous mythic language. They don't break from that tradition. They just develop a new mode of thought. And that takes over with the axial age. And Plato comes to this, 500 years or so, 600 years down the line, and develops off of Pythagoreanism, where they not only had this kind of axial age mystic philosophy, which became very widespread, but they also had concrete scientific deductive methods to apply in geometry and arithmetic. And they incorporated that into their metaphysical worldview, again, in a way that was harmonious with the general kind of perennialist currents in which they developed. And then Plato develops this idea of the forms. He solves the problem of universals. That problem is basically, where do abstract properties, so-called abstract properties of objects, subsist? The ball is red, that couch is red, but where is redness? Where is this thing that these various objects all participate in? Unless you have an ontology which accounts for regularities in nature and traces those regularities back to their source in something that is apart from particular instantiations, you can't really make sense of why language works, why we can be pattern recognizing creatures. And that works especially well when wedded to this kind of Pythagorean interpretation of the cosmos. The harmony of the spheres is based on the idea that numerical principles underlie physical reality. And by taking that assumption, Western philosophy and science achieved everything, whereas hardly anything was achieved by anybody else. This mathematizing vein in natural science has been hyper successful, is still super successful, and the only way that makes sense is if you have an ontology for mathematicals. Plato has a specific ontology for where the mathematicals are. He also has a theory of consciousness, in a sense, and that he has a theory of where the soul fits into this whole cosmology. So the way I evaluate between different worldviews is, besides internal characteristics like parsimony and coherence, it's what explanatory power do they have? And when it comes to all the major problems in philosophy, Platonism basically has good answers consistently, and other systems typically don't. They fail in one regard or another.
Amazing. That is absolutely fascinating. That is, and I can totally see how you've explained just here and in your other content, how by you kind of recrafting this, or kind of dusting the books off, or polishing the sort of tools of Western civilization, what made it the West. I can sort of see how this is the ultimate, perhaps, weapon, or the ultimate answer to a lot of this, I guess, atheism, liberalism, cultural Marxism. And I can totally see how that's important, at a very essential level, that we have this thought and understanding throughout our civilization, regarding what you just said. So that's really awesome. Would you just kind of maybe taking a bit of a divergence, would you like to explain a bit about how this ties into what you're doing at Return to the Land, and perhaps what you hope to achieve with this?
Yeah, sure. So Return to the Land is our private membership association, under which we have currently one LLC, which owns a piece of property, which some of us now live on. And so this is kind of the framework whereby we can create intentional communities in a legally secure way without worrying about, discrimination laws and things like that. So the idea is that you can buy into one of these LLCs and have rights to property. You don't own the land outright. That's one of those necessary things to get around discrimination law, frankly. But then, you have to join the PMA first. That's the umbrella organization. And there are some people trying to start other communities under our PMA. Basically, we've kind of solved the legal issues. We have our documents that are publicly available as far as the operating agreement for the LLC. Future LLCs will be posted as well on the website. So you can read as far as our particular framework. We made it relatively laissez-faire. We have some things about like, a commitment to living a virtuous life, trying to improve yourself, not being degenerates and such. But we really don't get into super specific details in it because this is the legal framework to allow intentional communities, identitarian communities to flourish. So we want as many people as possible to participate in these. We want to make it easy. That includes, up to and including helping to develop infrastructure for people who want to build communities. So we're learning all the skills, the legal aspect, the development aspect, because a lot of people have talked about stuff like this for years. I've talked about it for a decade online. And in the beginning, everyone pretty much seemed to be critical of my perspective there, where I was thinking, basically the broad mainstream society seems to be doomed. These trends are already underway as far as demographic trends. Like people look at the numbers, but they don't look closely enough where like births are already essentially like less than 50% white in the US. So it's not just about what's the current percentage. It's like, what is the future going to look like? And that's already in motion. These people are already in the country. And as far as like rates of intermarriage, those have risen. And also many people have family members that are in mixed race relationships. And so they have some loyalty to the cause of multiracialism intrinsically. So as a result of that, I think looking down the line at demographic trends, family trends, this is just going to get worse. I mean, there is a bit of a backlash against it now as people are belatedly waking up to these realities, but the momentum is all one way. And there's very little pushing back in the other direction, except these kind of expressions of like dissatisfaction with the direction of things. But no one has the actual power to change it. So I thought 10 years ago, like, okay, we're not turning this ship around. This is hopeless. So what can we do? Well, we can build communities. We have the right to build these sorts of communities in the US. I don't know about New Zealand or anywhere else. So yeah, I mean, that's what we can do. So therefore, I'm trying to do this. But the broader vision is really create this network of parallel communities and scale this and make it easier for more people to buy into it and see the practical benefits as mainstream society becomes less and less livable, more chaotic, less safe, as our education systems degrade in their quality. We can offer a clear alternative that is functional. It's not just ideas that people are talking about. These are living communities that you can join. I mean, this is why Orania in South Africa is growing and flourishing, because white South Africans are realizing like, yeah, the future does not look good for their families. So I think this is demonstrated that as society kind of degrades, there will be a demand for this sort of thing. And so we're getting in relatively early and laying the groundwork. Now, as far as like how does Platonism and Christianity fit into that? We're non-denominational. We're not even a Christian organization explicitly. We accept people of different faith backgrounds, but most of us are Christian, and that is kind of culturally what we are, whether you like it or not. So developing a more intellectually coherent, competitive form of Christianity, I think long run will just help us. And the Platonism, this is actually, how this all started. Like I frankly had given up on the idea of starting these communities because there just wasn't enough interest. And instead I had kind of lowered my expectations, and I planned on just starting a Platonic school. Like Plato had his school, other Neoplatonists like Iamblichus, or there's a school in Alexandria had schools. So I wanted to do the same thing. And especially for like younger guys graduating high school or maybe right out of college, they would have a way of getting into the tradition, the Western tradition, in a streamlined, neat, facilitated, easy way, and in the traditional way, which is to live kind of in that teaching context, to share meals together, to also have like workouts and things that engage the mind and body. That's part of Platonism. It's not all just intellectualism. Plato was called Plato, of course. His real name was Aristocles. Plato because of supposedly his broad shoulders. He was a wrestler, so Plato was his wrestling name,
He
and
was the
they would
Chad.
yes, no, obviously,
Alpha
uh,
Chad. Okay.
yeah. So I wanted to start that Platonic school just because I thought it would be good for young guys, and so I'm still going to run that school out of the first community once we're done with the community center. And beyond that, of course, we have other like educational ambitions, how to organize homeschool networks, and also there's the peer academy concept, which is a bit broader. We're building the website for that now, so that'll be an online system as well as an in-person system. And the idea is basically to facilitate individual research, sharing, peer evaluation, and then organizing research projects. Effectively, what we've all been doing online in a decentralized way, but organized and kind of in a way that's immunized against mob mentalities and appeal to the lowest common denominator, which does happen when it's just kind of a free for all. But yeah, those are the educational projects we have going.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic and a real breath of fresh air, as Hector said earlier, to actually see someone with the willpower and vision and intelligence and creativity and all that to actually create something that is off the internet. Jonathan Bowden, said that the birthplace of the new right will be on the internet, but inevitably we have to come to the real world somehow. So it's really fantastic to see that you, especially in comparison with other communities in America that have, well, unfortunately not been so successful. If we think about,
Like
and I don't mean,
Betaria or stuff like that. That sort of fell apart.
well, yeah, the what one? Sorry,
Oh,
Hector.
Betaria, Benjamin Owens one. He wanted to basically do the
Oh,
same thing, but I don't think he was intelligent enough to actually put it
oh,
together.
oh, okay, yeah, I'm sure it's a.
There are actually, so I live in Missouri now. I'm moving down to the land in Arkansas pretty soon, but there are still Bertaria people in Missouri. I actually
Oh,
met up with some of them not too long
Did
ago.
it actually work? I thought like they never got like were never able to put it all together somehow. Like there still isn't any sort of community out on the actual Betaria plot of land or something like that, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, they didn't work out the legal framework as far as I understand. I don't want to spread misinformation or rumors, but it was like one person, Benjamin, owns all of it, and then you have to kind of live there, trusting that he's just gonna
Oh, okay.
look after you, which is obviously insane. Um, but yeah, people were still interested and involved in the Barataria community, and I know he's still active, so I assume something's going on there.
hmm, hmm,
I think he just owns
amazing.
the land and uses it as like a host events and stuff, but I think that's as far as it ever
Yeah.
got.
hmm
Mm, mm.
Yeah, people want to own land too. You can't just
Yeah,
like
you can't
everyone
just be
come
like,
down and live on develop my land for me. It's like
yeah.
really?
Well, it's yeah, that's the thing. It sounds like you have some sort of like it's a trust or something, right? LLC, so that people can buy into. So they own
Right.
shares of the LLC, or if I'm
Exactly.
getting
The
that, yeah.
LLC owns the land, and then you own a share in the LLC, and that uh, our LLC document spells out exactly who has rights to what part of the land. And then when you sell, it's specifically what you've developed on your land. That's the what the value that you're selling. So your share can like augment in value if you develop your land specifically. So we
Okay,
fixed it.
that makes way more sense than Betaria. So I can see how that would already get more attention. And I mean, Benjamin Owen's a very eccentric guy, to put it lightly. So I can see why you wouldn't want to put all your eggs in his basket. So it already sounds a bit better than that.
He's
The
funny. I mean, I like him
I
enough. I
like
don't
him as
watch him all the
well.
time, but
It's
yeah.
it's just a
yeah.
little bit eccentric's a nice way to put it.
hmm
That's why it's good. The way you guys described it, it made me think of his project like, I'm King Owen Benjamin, and these are my lads, and because I'm the tallest and the funniest and make fun of India, make fun of Indians the most, I should be king, and you all have to do what I say. But no, of course he's not like that. But yeah, no, that's interesting, very interesting. So yeah, of course, you're speaking to our community as well as yours, Aarvoll. So I'll just speak to some of our young guys, which we have a lot of, and the future is uncertain, as Eric just laid out for us. I mean, it is all going one way, And it's only really now that we're seeing something of some sort of reaction to it all. This is what it is, guys. You're gonna have to, like, highly recommend you check Eric's stuff out and look at what he's doing. This is the kind of stuff that we're gonna need to be doing. I mean, Bill Gates is buying up land. I think Klaus Schwab already has his replacement. There's all this stuff happening, and it's kind of like really way out of our hands now. So it's really important that we pay attention to people like Eric and really kind of encapsulate his thinking and methodologies and stuff like that. So pay close attention to this. He's got a lot of good advice and great stuff to show us all. So and it's good to see that you don't appear to be placed near any train tracks or anything like that could create any sort of sabotage. Unfortunately, that was the case with the Amish in Ohio, I think several months ago, where they were unfortunately attacked by what was that? I don't know if it was nanoscale gray goo, but it was something. Do you remember what that was? There was that highly toxic substance, Hector. You wouldn't happen to
I'm
remember
not
that?
too sure.
Yeah, it was some sort of highly toxic particle, and I think everybody, was it even Ohio? I'm sorry, guys. There's just been so information I've been glossing through recently, but in any case, this is some really great stuff that you're doing here. And in terms of your school, so you wanted to found a school. Um, I'd like to know how you're going along with that, but I also see that you've surrounded yourself with a lot of like people who appear to be interested in science, philosophy, metaphysics, technology, AI. And what are you doing with this? If you could maybe give us a little bit more insight, could you give us a little taster of what you're planning to do in the future, as if you were explaining it to us like we were potential prospects, or like we would enroll our children in this new classical.
Sure,
Yeah, go ahead.
sure. Yeah. So right now, obviously, the in-person infrastructure is not ready to host students, but I do have my reading groups. So we use the Iamblichian curriculum. This is the traditional way to teach Plato and Aristotle. So we go through Aristotle's Organon with Neoplatonic and Peripatetic commentary. We go through the Platonic dialogues in Iamblichus's curriculum, and most of those have Neoplatonic commentary. So there's this curriculum that the ancients relied on as a kind of initiatic process for how to actually get into this philosophy. I was lucky enough to have had a background with Advaita Vedanta and to have learned from, Vedic monks about their system. So I could just ask them questions and they answered questions. And then when I read Plato, it made sense because I already had that kind of philosophical groundwork to interpret it. I think that led me to some misinterpretations until I got to the Neoplatonic commentators and corrected them. But at least it allowed me to kind of get into the system. And for a lot of people, they just don't know how to approach it because there's too much there. It's not at the surface level of the dialogues. It's very easy to misinterpret Plato. So that's the goal of the reading groups, to initiate people into the Platonic tradition in a coherent, clear way. We also do some other like random Neoplatonic readings and some math texts as well. We're doing Euclid. We're actually starting with book 7, which is where he gets into the number theory stuff, which is kind of fun. That's the way you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to do arithmetic, then geometry. Okay. So for whatever reason, the books in Euclid are flipped around. But yeah, so that's what we have going currently. And you can join that by signing up on Subscribestar or Patreon. It's /Aarvoll at either of those places. We meet on the weekends in the mornings. Great. But yeah, once the infrastructure is there to begin taking students, and I might even begin with a limited number of students, like a handful, 2 or 3 maybe, even before we have completed the community center, effectively just allowing people to come down and camp and help out with various things in exchange for, beginning this kind of in-person curriculum and philosophical dialogue. And In some senses, like we've overthought education, where it has to be in this context, it has to be in this order, but really just having like someone who's further down the road than yourself to ask questions to and to kind of experience on a day-to-day basis, like that is the traditional way of teaching. That's how Iamblichus's school actually worked. You would go and live with Iamblichus and share meals with Iamblichus and just kind of learn from him on a day-to-day basis. So that's like the very most bare bones level first steps. And then the Platonic Academy will kind of grow from there into more structured courses. You know, you can come down for a 2-week course or a 1-month course. So we'll structure those, you know, as as we go, basically. Like once in a while, I'll begin a new unit in the reading groups. So it'll kind of work in a similar way. But yeah, so we'll also start like this coming year with our homeschool group. And I don't think that I personally have a huge amount of insight into how to do K through 12 education better than anyone else who's already kind of an expert in that. Like I like Doug Wilson, who has, I forget what his school is called, but he has a classics based K through 12 program in Idaho. So yeah, I mean, we're gonna look at some of those resources. Like we homeschool my eldest daughter, and it's relatively easy to find coursework online, worksheets online. Um, she's only 7, so we haven't gotten like too deep into exactly how I should teach, complex topics from history. There's a website, School of the West. I've talked with the guy who runs that site. He's trying to compile educational resources as basically a homeschool aid, specifically for identitarian European heritage people, which is a big thing because when you're looking for educational materials for your kids and you're just looking on the open market, you're going to find a lot of stuff that you would rather not your kids be exposed to. That's unfortunately, that's the case when you turn on the TV or anywhere. It's like, it's really hard to avoid it. So we do need to focus on making materials for our kids. But yeah, I would point to School of the West. And as we go, as our homeschool project develops, we'll kind of develop that stuff. The Pure Academy system, again, that's going to be a website in the near future. We don't have a big budget. We have luckily guys involved who are into programming, into web design. So I think it's going to be a good product when it finally releases, and it'll be something that everyone in the community can kind of participate in. We have so much in the way of independent research that many of us have done to have one platform where you can bring it and not just have it sit there, not just to be shared around and liked and stuff, but to actually have it do something. Like get that research, have it evaluated, and use those evaluations to create rankings, hierarchies that then can organize research projects. And then those projects become products that people can kind of participate in. So that'll be self-explanatory once the website comes out. But we won't really get started on that until then. But yeah, those are the big things. So in person, I'll be hosting people in the not too distant future who are interested in these philosophical topics. Eventually, I'll offer more formal courses. We'll be working on the homeschool stuff, and then Pure Academy will be the big project eventually.
Wonderful. That sounds great. And as you can see on his website, you've got membership and donate, so you guys can check that out if you want to contribute to our or Aarvoll's sort of pro-Western construct that he's initiating for all of the West really at this point. So yeah, and I mean, just commenting on that myself, which Hector and I have spoken about, listening to what we've just heard with Aarvoll speaking there is that is a much more healthy and humane way to raise your kids. It kind of actually makes me a little bit jealous that I wasn't raised and educated in such a way. I have a very different way of learning, so I think that something like that definitely could have benefited me. In New Zealand, it's sort of like the atmosphere is you've got these hordes of kids, and they all these great big sort of like commissars, these teachers stand over you like commissars, who are like, which are really in the form of these chubby old ladies who demand absolute authority, and they kind of stand over you like beasts from Lord of the Rings. And it's a very kind of industrial kind of
Yeah.
learn this, learn that, and it's just really kind of horrible to be
Yeah, well,
honest.
me and
And
Gilbert have talked about it, how like the public school system is like literally just designed to create assembly line workers. Like
mm,
you don't
Oh
learn
yeah.
very much. You don't
No, the Prussian
socialize
model
properly.
like literally was invented for that purpose. You're right.
Yeah,
mm,
and yeah, we basically don't need the public school system anymore. We need to actually return again to uh, kids actually being raised by their parents and by their communities, because this model doesn't work,
mm.
and it's gonna not work. It's gonna just keep getting worse and worse as society gets worse and worse.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
and if I could add on to that, I mean, it's just like going back to when I was a kid, and just kind of revisualizing what I experienced, and thinking about my teachers. These are kind of, and I'm not trying to be mean to anyone just on purpose, but you kind of are letting inferior people govern the lives of your children. Like when I thought back to, I had some pretty cool teachers and some really awesome ones that I could probably count on two hands. But the vast majority are these kinds of not very intelligent, not very inspiring people who don't really have anything really that meaningful to offer your kids, and as such, this is what you get. You get these kind of 100 IQ people who have nothing but shallow things to say, and the rest of their lives are sort of informed by the television, and we know how bad that is. So, yeah, it's just, yeah, I mean, people have really got to get into the mindset of, you're responsible for your kids, and you've got to take control of their lives and not let inferior people uh you know bend and shape the minds of your children into something not nice, and we
Yeah.
have firsthand account, and that's a very tragic and sad thing. We need and we need hierarchy, so we need highly moral, very strong people, high IQ people like Eric, to kind of guide the minds of our young, if we're going to have anyone outside of ourselves helping our kids. And yeah, so that this is don't give your. But I think the moral of that little snippet there is, don't give your kids to just anyone. Don't give your kids to just any device. It's really incredible
I
to
mean,
me how.
come on,
Go
mate,
ahead.
don't you like the TV? Didn't you see the Skibbity Biden epic segment from John Leno, whoever it was today?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of that's what they're exposed to, and people can't think beyond really, SpongeBob SquarePants, annoying Squidward, or Patrick, or maybe they live like Patrick Star under a rock. But yeah. Anyway, sorry, I kind of have a tendency to make things weird, but yeah. So that's really great that you have re-encapsulated such a crystallized idea of where we really need to be going with this, and yeah, we really need people to popularize things like this. So on that kind of strain of thought, one of your ways to resurrect Western civilization is to bring the classics back. You seem to emphasize this as being particularly important. Could you, briefly maybe explain some of the importance of this? Because it's kind of interesting, like we have to make like a parallel world amidst all this just insanity and chaos, and we see the right kind of the global right sort of diverging into this Groyper America First movement by Nick Fuentes. That seems to be where a lot of the popularity and energy is headed, at least as far as I and a lot of other people can see. And his kind of theme of things is Kanye West, saying, "Yeah, oh, I'm a nibber," shoot people, rob stuff. And stuff like we're on YouTube, but yeah. Anyway, and it's just, I kind of think of that, and I kind of go, well, is that really the way we want to be taking things on the right? And you're kind of a part of this broader movement. Obviously, you're going to AFPAC. You've got a lot of overlap with his followers there. Yes. Would you just like to comment on all of that? Your thoughts, Eric?
Right. Yeah, I think like Nick's platform and ambitions definitely go beyond what you just stated, Kanye West or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think we actually like Nick and myself like share some similar intuitions as far as what society should look like. I mean, he's like a Catholic integralist, which Catholicism was that vehicle for classical learning and classical culture into the medieval period. In a certain way, like the scholastic system in medieval Europe was like what Plato was calling for. Like there was this kind of separate society of philosophical elites who gave up their private property and managed everything from the top down. Um, so, and there were like the three castes, those who pray, those who fight, and those who work.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of Platonic influence on Catholicism. I would say going back to the classical sources themselves is very important, though, so that you can understand specifically how that scholastic worldview came about. Because if you just kind of are dropped in the middle of it, it can be functional, but if you're interested in understanding it, you have to know where it came from.
Hmm.
So that's the main reason for the classics in general. But the real kind of treasure at the heart of it all is Platonism, which is this philosophical system that solved a bunch of problems that we've been relitigating and rehashing for centuries with no progress because we actually got it right in the first place. Plato did solve these problems in a way that's better. So we shouldn't just break with Plato for the sake of breaking with Plato. I think it's really a sentimental thing. Like when you read Nietzsche on Plato or some of these, or Heidegger in his later works on Plato, there's a turn against Plato uh, on the basis of like no real coherent philosophical criticisms. It's just like, oh, it's limiting or it's a fixation with this like other eternal world. But we need to focus on this world. And it's like, well, if you want to understand this world, you have to understand the universal formative principles that make this world what it is. And if you don't have that ontology of the forms themselves, how the heck are you going to do that?
Mm.
So Platonism is that real kind of gem at the heart of antique culture, and learning the kind of literary side, the mythological side, the Greek plays, Homer, obviously, that helps to understand the worldview out of which Platonism emerged. In a broader sense, I actually think, beyond just Western identity, we should all be reading the major religious texts and myths of the world. I think comparative mythology should actually be part of K through 12 education, maybe a bit later in high school or something like that. Um, but yeah, that's just in order to understand world history, you have to go back to those ancient documents because they have shaped so much and continue to shape so much. Like to understand politics in the Middle East, you really do have to understand these sectarian divisions within Islam in the 700s.
True.
Like you have to get to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need that. Also, like I said, Platonism is a living philosophy, and so by literally just going back and reading the Neoplatonists, we will find new relevant information that has basically been lost, and we can reapply that in a modern context. And I'll be making some content along and I have in the past, but I'll make more content along those lines in the near future, like the late Neoplatonic model of matter, the systematic philosophy of matter, works perfectly with quantum mechanics, and I'm going to hopefully prove that in the not too distant future. They even called like the basic unit of matter the quantum, which a lot of people don't realize, and they said it was neither like great nor small. It's kind of intensive and remissive. So there's this like fluctuation of attraction or repulsion. It's indefinite. I mean, they explicitly say it's an indefinite quantum that is the most like fundamental unit of matter. So it's pretty interesting. But anyway, yeah, it's for the sake of understanding Platonism and also for the sake of understanding all of the history that follows. If you want to understand like even modern philosophers talking about like the modern period from Descartes on or Bacon on, well, Bacon and Descartes read Aristotle, they read the ancients. So you can't understand modern philosophy unless you read the ancients, and you can't understand the ancients unless you understand the worldview in which they were operating, including the myths. So just to understand ourselves and where we are, all that is obviously necessary.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah, and we all look forward to that content. And yeah, I mean, I think yeah, you've really outlined why it's so important that we all have an understanding of this stuff, because we see, this isn't for a lot of people, it may seem pie in the sky, but what you're actually saying makes a lot of sense. If you actually listen very carefully to what Eric is saying, this is, systems and frameworks of thought and understanding ourselves in relation to the world and the universe, and our inner beings, and things like this phenomena that we maybe can't quite explain yet. And we see in the absence of this thought, and comparatively to other groups of people who have a very fleshed out understanding of who they are, even though it might be kind of silly, or more suited to their perhaps IQ level, or their I guess inbuilt sensibilities. What is needed for, I think, a very high IQ populace like European man is something that is suited to us, which I believe very, very much so is what Eric is trying to tell all of us. So I think it's very important that we all look into this to understand ourselves better as a
Yeah.
race. And
Can I just add on to that real quick?
oh, sure.
So, yeah, I've been having this thought recently, and I've thought about it before, where if you're born with exceptional capacities, you can do great good or great evil.
Mhm.
If it's more important if you're born with extra talents, like it is more critical that you have the right guidance and education. And it's
Yes.
also just like it's easier to mess up when the system you're working with is more complicated. Forgive the analogy, but like if you're playing Super Smash Brothers and you want to use a very basic strategy with Kirby, like you can go ahead and do that. You can, it's easy. But if you want to do well playing with Fox, you have to learn all of the specific technical maneuvers. Otherwise, the low IQ Kirby player is just going to swallow you and throw you off the stage. The more complex and like refined the abilities of the character that you're embodying, the more necessary training becomes.
That is a great analogy. Like I would compare that to Tekken, the fighting game. That obviously you have Steve Fox, who's just the boxer or the Muay Thai guy, but you also have Lei Wu Long, and and Yoshimitsu, where it's like a lot more complicated. And yeah, totally. So if you're someone like that, or if you notice someone like that, probably more important, you see someone who's a bit more brighter than the average cookie, then encourage that person, and direct them to Aarvoll and to Eric, and return them to the land if possible. That's very, yeah. So that's really quite cool. Okay, awesome. So that's a great explanation. And okay, so we'll take another bit of a divergence. So we've kind of got, I think, a pretty good understanding of who is Aarvoll, what you're doing, what you're all about, how you are sort of your ideas are very fundamental to bring back a resurgence of the Western world in the psychology of white people. That's awesome. So then, in that case, amidst this highly chaotic time, um, considering that everything that's happens, especially like we see the, I guess I'll make this all one question, like we see the hyperpolarization problem that we're seeing in America, and that's sort of spread out across every Western nation all over the world. And then at a broader, not just at an internal level, but at a 1,000-foot view at a geopolitical level worldwide, we see, as the unfortunate figure, and kind of I would characterize him as a dark philosopher. Alexander Dugin would describe the world as moving from a period of unipolarity to multipolarity. I don't even like to say those words, where we see a third world kind of commie, um, national complex organize aggressively, buy into the BRICS. We see Russia against Ukraine and Eastern Europe, China against Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. And then we, have this, cookie dough injection agenda. How, if you don't have to sort of propound upon this or really flesh it out too much, or however you'd like to answer this. But I mean, I guess given the hyperpolarization in America and in all our nations, but particularly so in the U.S., and given this kind of shift towards these other maybe unsightly sort of nations, how do we what should we be doing at this point of time? If you could answer that.
Well, hyperpolarization comes largely from the structure of internet discourse and the nature of the algorithm. So this is something that we've done to ourselves somewhat unintentionally. I don't think this is part of like the 2030 agenda or something. This is just a factor of social media companies have an interest in attracting our engagement, and we're most engaged by things that make us angry, and that drives us into an us versus them mentality, which I'm not against that mentality. What my point here is actually that this is unintentionally creating an environment where tightly integrated identities with very clear enemies are emerging. And those are the kind of people who are actually motivated to go and start communities and start living in a different way. So that's actually just fine. Hyperpolarization helps the emergence of communities like the one that we're building in Arkansas. As far as like the health of the society at large, of course, it's totally unhealthy for it, and it's going to create chaos, and it's not in line with democracy. Like you watch C-SPAN and you see when Congress is in session, the behavior, and it's starting to look almost as bad as, the English Parliament. And, I thought for a long time that we were better than that, but I guess not. So that's just a diss on the English. But yeah, no, I don't think it's really a problem for us. It is a problem for society at large, but that just means the society at large is going to keep getting worse. And we'll have a very clear alternative and a very clear identity as that alternative with very clear enemies. So it kind of works out in our favor as far as like the agenda that actually is there, 2030 and all of that. Well, that's why like we have to build these communities and scale them rapidly so that we can defend our rights like in a legal, firm way. We have to control local government and state government eventually. National government is out of the question, but certain states are homogenous enough and culturally coherent enough that I think progress can be made in creating these pockets that are immunized, ironically, against forced shots and things like that.
Okay. Very interesting. Hector, could you cue that video that
Sure.
I sent? Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. So, yeah, we so in a way, you're saying it's not all is lost. It kind of makes me think about Spain and how Spain, they were. Well, actually, instead of me blabbing on like I usually do, let's watch this video by my friend, and let's get your thoughts.
GRU Colonel Stanislav Lunev.
Nobody didn't tell you that America just now is facing up to the coalition of hostile nations. Military allies between Russia and China almost is in place. If somebody will need explanation, I can explain it. And coalition between Russia and China with support of North Korea, Cuba, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Libya, it would be much more dangerous threat to this country than it was before, than it was in time of former Cold War. nuclear missile strike against this country. And in 60s and 70s, it was planned. 11, 12 day invasion would be in place in this country. Looters, millions of looters will come here. Is in final stage of its establishment, and unfortunately everything looks like that not only a millennium back would be real threat for the international security and American security, that military alliance between Russia and China, it's not big secret. Recently Russian Federation Prime Minister, in time of his visiting India, he openly said that he is working over this alliance. I cannot say that process of formulation of this alliance already finished, but I think that it's in final stage.
All right,
Yeah.
there you go.
There you go.
Introducing.
So you want to give us some context on who that is, Gil?
That was Colonel Lunev, a very high-ranking KGB defector. He was basically in that speech warning the West and America about the plans that Russia and China had to basically cripple and slowly annex the United States, as they're doing with Western Europe, well, Eastern Europe, but soon to be Western Europe, as President of Russia, Medvedev, said, we want to create an open Eurasia from Lisbon to Vladivostok. And this is, a very high-ranking KGB officer just kind of relaying part of a very big and sophisticated plan between Russia and China to achieve that multipolarity that they would seek. And as we're sort of talking about these sort of movements and then intercontinental relationships and exchanges, Eric, do you have you looked into any KGB defector literature, or have you? What do you feel about how things are resting? Like we just have a lot of hype over Taiwan coming out right now. I'm sure maybe you've seen that, but have you looked into any of the defector literature, and where do you kind of sit with what's happening geopolitically right now?
Well, I'm not worried about a Russian invasion of the U.S. mainland, and I don't think they have any intention of actually invading Western Europe. As far as the defector literature, I'm not really familiar with it.
Okay.
But I do know that Russia does engage in disinformation campaigns, and just like, many countries have propaganda wings, just like the U.S. has, in order to shape global politics. The U.S. is probably more guilty of it than anybody, but Russia has their operations as well. And a goal has been of theirs, a kind of hyperpolarization, and something that breaks down like the integrity of the American identity. So I think but then that in a way puts me like on the same side, in that I'm against the hegemonic powers at play in the West.
Why is that?
I would like, why is that? Because what they're doing to us, the hegemonic powers like in the US are not controlled by heritage Americans. They're controlled by a foreign minority who has grievances against the majority population, and our policy has reflected that. They're trying to reshape demographically our society, and have been for 70 years. So that's my biggest grievance against the powers that be in America. There are others, and the same thing is happening in Western Europe. So since I don't appreciate the hegemons here, and there are more traditional societies in the form of China and Russia has its own problems, but they are more traditional in certain respects.
Okay, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
In certain respects, they're flawed as well. But I don't want to live in Russia. I don't want to live in China, so I don't really care. Like, but as far as like what they're pushing, like, yeah, Dugin is a traditionalist. China is more secular, but they're like by nature conservative in their actions. They're very patient and they take a lot of time, and they will eventually get Taiwan because of that, I'm sure. But yeah, more directly, like what they stand to do is offer some force from the outside to break up Western hegemonic powers. To if they're sowing the seeds of hyperpolarization here, well then I will go ahead and feed into that and say yes, the American hegemon is not our friend. Therefore, we need to form something else independent of it. And like now we have a very clear enemy, Russia and China. Increasing destabilization can actually help. It's like a limited form of accelerationism. I'm not a universal accelerationist, but when it comes to accelerating the collapse of these particular power structures that are determining our destiny, that's fine. As far as like the economy and kind of the state of the world technologically as well, I would rather have things move slowly. But when it comes to upsetting agendas in Washington, D.C., yeah, go ahead, Russia. Go ahead, China. Give it a shot.
Okay. You don't think that's potentially quite risky or dangerous? I think Russia and China have expressed their motives quite clearly that they would like to create their own level of hegemony. So do you think it's right for Western peoples or white peoples to sort of, I guess, at what level are you saying that I guess in the U.S., your group of right-wing white people, at what group would they participate in that power influencing America, and at what point is that sort of traitorous to America, and at what point is that not? Of course, I'm not calling you a traitor. Sorry, I'm not trying to. Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, it's kind of. I think it's a very risky thing to kind of when you're talking about, yeah, kind of almost a soft defection to another, power block which hasn't really been, let's say, pro-American or pro-Western even, as you hinted with, Putin, and of course we know about his dealings with Chabad Lubavitch and how there's like extreme problems with church attendance. I think it's like 4% church attendance in Russia versus roughly America's 40% church, or roughly, very roughly speaking. So yeah, I mean, would you care to answer that?
Well, again, I don't want to live in Russia or China, and I don't need to cooperate with them. I'm just not threatened by what they're doing. I don't see them as interrupting my plans personally.
Okay.
So maybe it's like a little bit selfish in my mentality, but also the Western hegemons are more directly my enemy because they're destroying my society. Russia's not destroying my society. China's not doing that. The leaders in Washington are doing that.
You don't think that there's been a trail since the fall of the Berlin Wall, or since the perestroika deception, as many call it, perestroika being the restructuring of Russia under Gorbachev to democratize. Okay,
where the oligarchs took everything.
Yeah, but basically, yeah, right. You don't think that that was a kind of ruse to reel in, I guess, perhaps who was it? Reagan, I suppose, and other people to kind of open their society up to sort of KGB or FSB influences in an attempt to subvert America and the West, especially since thousands of Stasi flooded.
Subvert them from what? They're already like trying to replace the native, like our leadership is trying to replace the native people of our country. So like if Russia wants to subvert that, that's okay. I don't care. You get what I'm saying? Like I'm not directly threatened by what Russia's doing. If they're gonna like be against the US federal government, fine. I'm going to grow my communities and protect us legally as far as we can be protected under the Constitution and state laws. And then eventually, hopefully, we're large enough so that when Russia is finally successful in like completely collapsing the US federal government, some big organization with a lot of infrastructure in place will be able to pick up some pieces. Like maybe something like that is possible. But Russia has its own problems. China has its own problems. They can't, I think their capacity for foreign adventures is very limited. I mean, they're having problems on their own back door, both of them. So I'm just not threatened by them.
You don't, but you don't think they contribute to this in any way, or
to what?
To the sort of I guess the dismantling of the West. I'll just finish with that, then we'll move on to something else, because I can see you've kind of answered. You feel like you've exhausted this, so I don't want to annoy you anymore.
Yeah, I think like they're not really contributing to the cultural degradation. That's happening out of Hollywood, and that's not Russians doing that.
Okay.
That's not the Chinese. Well, now it kind of is, because China bought a bunch of Hollywood studios.
Yeah.
But I don't know how sophisticated Chinese psyops are. Russia has a lot more capacity there.
Yeah.
But again, I just like our own indigenous elites, so-called elites, are doing far more harm than they are. And again, I just don't think they have this unlimited capacity. I think also like the way that we have acted on the world stage has been much more violent, less beneficial to the countries we've interacted with. Like China, like, yeah, they're like predatory in their loans or something, but they're developing infrastructure. Russia offers natural resources as a tangible benefit to European countries. I just think, yeah, the US has been more parasitical with the Bretton Woods system. We're like siphoning the wealth of the world away through this like artificial central banking cabal. So I think we're like kind of the villains of world history at the moment, more or less.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you do think that there's a meaningful divide between what Russia was under, I guess, Gorbachev and prior to Gorbachev, and what Russia is now under Putin and Medvedev?
Well, yeah, he did like go after the oligarchs, Putin,
Okay.
when he got into office, and they were like several of them were, they had to flee the country. So.
Okay. Yeah. But okay. All right. Interesting stuff. So that's your view on that situation. Fine. In light of world-changing events, I think there's another good video that kind of perfectly encapsulates the vaccine agenda. I'll get Hector to kind of cue that up. Perhaps and you can. Sorry, my friend. You don't have to cue that up. And yeah, to me, it's pretty clear that, as Rand Paul has exposed, there has been sort of like a worldwide kind of strange global coalition between the elites or high-ranking military officers in the U.S. and I guess intelligence agents in the U.S. and scientists. Sort of forming a coalition with the like kind of positions in China of military officers, scientists, intelligence agents that kind of kick this whole vaccine agenda off. I'd just like to cue this video because I think this perfectly encapsulates the sort of genesis, perhaps isn't the best word, but where it all sort of began. If you'd like to go ahead, Hector.
All right. I'll just add to the previous topic. I think it's like with like the multipolar world stuff. I mean, just because like the West is like decadent and corrupt doesn't necessarily mean like Russia and China are good. Like both they're sort of both our enemies in a way. I don't really prescribe that the enemy of the enemy is my friend. I still think the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. So I think that's sort of the best way to look at it.
They can be useful, and they're not as threatening as the enemy that's in your own house.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, enemies are useful in the ways that they sort of embarrass themselves, I guess. I guess it's like a way that.
Yeah.
Oh, anyways, I'll just.
So, on that, do you have any thoughts on the intelligence reports of 150,000 PLA soldiers apparently breaching the Darien Gap, going across the border? Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, I don't know if those numbers are right.
Okay.
I
Seems quite
definitely don't
large,
want, Chinese fighting age men coming across the southern border. And it is happening. For what purpose exactly? I'm not sure. Again, I'm not worried about a ground invasion. Like, people who aren't in America and who don't like understand what it's like here don't get like we have the most powerful military in the world, but we also have like every redneck out in the sticks has a huge arsenal, and we're fine. Like, I'm not worried about someone literally invading America. And if something like that happened, like a bunch of Chinese infiltrated and then tried to take out whatever targets, I think that would create an atmosphere that would be very favorable to identitarian arguments. If all of a sudden we're concerned about the big bad other, then that feeds into identitarian positions. Just like with COVID, in a way, the instability of global supply chains was revealed, and then that led to more protectionistic policies, like what Trump went for immediately and what Joe Biden has gone for afterwards with the CHIP Act and whatnot. And that's, I think, right. That is better for America. And so, if China made a big move like that, they would be like totally ridiculed on the world stage, and that would bring the West as a whole together. So I think that would do China more harm than good. I mean, if they want to come in and infiltrate and get intelligence and stuff, well, they've been doing that forever anyway. It's like all these grad students in our most prestigious research universities are reporting back, they're Chinese nationals reporting back information. So that's how, because we're an open society, we've already allowed that to happen. They almost don't need to sneak over the border. They can just get a student visa.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're kind of just like, well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it does look like there's a fair amount of at least like Chinese influence on the southern border crisis. It does look like there's some sort of ops going on there.
And also you have them waiting on the sort of infrastructure systems, as it's been discovered, not just in the US, but in New Zealand. There was a breach in cybersecurity. So,
Chinese firms like literally manufacture a lot of our like electrical and communication grid components. So of course they have backdoors to everything.
Yeah,
just
that
like
is
Israel
that is sort of like the fault of like our retarded Western leaders that let that happen, to be fair. So
yeah, exactly. That's the point.
So
right.
Go ahead. All right. Well, yeah.
I'll play this video.
Sometime around 2003.
Can you see it? Yeah, you should be able to, right?
Defense Minister Chi Hao.
Yeah.
Oh crap! A double speed somehow.
Double speed. Yeah. Oh no, it's all good. Yeah.
Sometime around 2003, Defense Minister Chi Haotian gave a speech to high-level Communist Party officials. Details given in Chi's speech coincide with previously unpublished Defector testimony on Sino-Russian military plans. He outlines the necessity of Chinese Lebensraum to teach the Chinese to go out and colonize the United States mainland. In order to do this, he suggests the use of race-specific biological weaponry. Here is what he said. Of the research done on genetic weapons throughout the world, Israel is the most advanced. Their genetic weapons are designed to target Arabs and protect the Israelis. But even they have not reached the stage of actual deployment. We have cooperated with Israel on some research. Perhaps we can introduce some of the technologies used to protect Israelis and remold these technologies to protect the yellow people. But their technologies are not mature yet, and it is difficult for us to surpass them in a few years. If it has to be 5 or 10 years before some breakthrough can be achieved in genetic weapons, we cannot afford to wait any longer. End quote. So, is this what the COVID-19 vaccines were? Is this not evidence of China using an Israeli weapon? A weapon delivered unwittingly through Marxist-Leninist traitors and fellow travelers in our government and pharmaceutical industry. To conclude, Chi Hyochin continues, death is the engine that moves history forward.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, so I think that's kind of a bit of I guess pre-story to the background of this vaccine. What do you think? Just in your opinion, Eric, what do you think the cookie dough injection agenda was all about? And also, what do you think? Maybe I guess you can provide us unique insight into what was there any goal in this metaphysically?
Yeah, I think this is an extension of Rockefeller medicine, the idea of creating a kind of medical police state. I mean, it's telling that anti-Semitism is a mental health disorder in the DCM. And that's one way of controlling populations that is palatable and was demonstrated to be so when they started rolling out the shots. So people would shame others who didn't participate because it was because of public health. And so it's a very effective way of controlling populations. I also think the particular technology, the mRNA systems, is they wanted mass experimentation because it's a very flexible platform for I don't know how much I can say, but for therapies, genetic therapies. And yeah, there's really, it's a huge amount of potential compared to traditional vaccines in their eyes. Of course, it's more inherently, as a novel technology, less secure, less well known. We don't know what consequences it will have. It looks like potentially the health consequences have been very bad. If you look at overall all-cause mortality and cancers and things like that, it seems like for some reason in the last few years, people are getting a lot less healthy. But yeah, I think it's mostly about control. I think a lot of it is actually about profit on the part of these pharmaceutical companies, which there is a very clear profit motive. It's actually what they're directed by law to do. Corporations have an obligation to the shareholder. They don't have an obligation to the general public ethically, outside of don't break the law. But then they naturally lobby to have special exemptions and all these special treatments from the FDA and from regulatory agencies. So it's financial interests on the part of pharmaceutical elites. It is part of a long-standing agenda of population control to control people by defining health, defining this is a just cause for taking away freedoms. It's something that's very kind of viscerally appealing to people. And as far as the geopolitical aspect and what China was doing, I don't think the virus actually came from China. I think that's the vector of transmission. But, the Wuhan virology lab was operating off of funds that came from our own government. And it was our own government's programs in the past that had been operated there. And I think that the lab itself was originally built by the French. But anyway, that's kind of irrelevant. But I don't think it actually leaked out of the lab. I think if you look at the earliest cases, they were actually closer to the wet market. And I don't think it was the wet market. I think it was the World Military Games at the end of 2019, I think in November, that introduced this virus. And where a lot of the US soldiers stayed, that's where you had some of the first cases. All the earliest cases around the wet market. The hotel where the American soldiers stayed was right next to the wet market. So that's where I think the virus came from. I think it came from Fort Detrick, the US bioweapons program. And that, why? I think it was kind of a weapon against China, but also a way of forwarding this kind of medical tyranny agenda. That's just my opinion. That's all. I don't have all the sources to back up everything there, but that's as far as my impression goes.
You think that the collusion between Western government officials and Chinese government officials is a bit strange, or the placement of how that, as you described it, giving your detailed knowledge of the event, you think that was kind of that's all pretty suspicious, right? That all that is going on, and it seemed to coincide with locking the whole world down and getting everybody forcibly vexed. Yeah,
well, I mean, America's been very involved in the development of China into the power that it is, and their ideology. I mean, I guess famously Mao Zedong went to Yale, right? And American finance built up China during the 90s and were still very influential. A lot of American corporations are vested hugely in China. I mean, recently there's been kind of a turn away from that, but yeah, American influence there is massive. And cooperation, like the scientific community, obviously is always trying to be internationally cooperative. Scientists are very open-minded psychological types. So some of it could be explained just organically, like there are kind of legit reasons for pushing some kind of international cooperation in certain domains. But yeah, we've meddled over there for a long time, and they've meddled over here back, and neither nation is a monolith. And there are forces here that are more anti-Chinese, forces here that are totally controlled by China, forces here that are trying to control China, and I guess vice versa. I don't know how many real pro-American forces are at work in China these days, though.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, was interested to hear your takes on that. Hector, do you want to say anything then? You've been a little bit quiet.
Well, just with the whole COVID stuff, I think the actual pharmaceutical companies is one part of it, and it's obviously a big part. But there's the other big part is just the media cooperation of the whole agenda, because this all wouldn't have been able to happen if you didn't have the false consensus being pushed in the media, right? So,
right. Well, what percent of their revenue comes from pharmaceutical ads?
In America, probably a lot.
Yeah.
Same with New Zealand, right, Hector?
There isn't really too much. I don't actually watch TV that much, but there is some pharmaceutical ads here. But I've seen American TV before, and the pharmaceutical ads there on literally, it's insane the amount of pharmaceutical ads that are on TV in America.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Okay, cool. Okay, with that, I guess we'll move on. You don't want to say anything else, Hector, or
No,
sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you guys have been having a good conversation. I haven't really been able to. I haven't needed to butt in.
Okay, cool. Just being aware of time. Eric, you said you could do an hour and a half. I think is that right, Hector? We're coming up on
we're coming up to that.
Okay. So we've got 6 minutes left or something. Okay, I just want to be conscious of your time. I think there was a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about, a lot of interesting stuff I wanted to delve in with you, Eric. But I guess I will just ask about this one. What are some of your main arguments for an absolute intellect?
What do you mean by absolute intellect, first of all?
Okay, I think what we're referring to here is God.
Okay. Yeah, so I wouldn't identify God in an unqualified sense with absolute intellect. There is intellect itself, I think, but there are also multiple intellects, in my view, that transcend the physical world. There are Platonic arguments, that you can go to. I don't know how. I think they are good, but the thing with Neoplatonic arguments is they're very counterintuitive for modern people. I think they are very intuitive by their nature, but it's just a foreign way of thinking, and sometimes it doesn't feel very persuasive because of that. A more kind of up to date or in tune with modern sensibility kind of argument for the existence of intellects is just that you have to have these universals have a real subsistence. So mathematical truth has to exist somewhere if it is going to be true. If a sentence is true, there has to be some referent of that sentence that is real. So 2 + 2 = 4 is unqualifiedly true. And so the numbers involved and the proposition, the operators, have to be real. And where do numbers exist? Obviously, in the physical world, pure numbers aren't to be found. But in our minds, the pure concepts can be found. You know, the perfect circle, the perfect line. Maybe we can't visualize it in precise detail, but we have the notions, we have like the formulas for producing the perfect circle in our mind, and it's intelligible to us. We understand like propositions from Euclid, even though that stuff doesn't exist in the physical world. Somehow it's all 100% consistent, and like we can agree in an intersubjective way that these things are true and these things are false. And where do those truths subsist? They subsist in a mind in us. And so what else would they subsist in nature than some kind of principle of mind behind the world? One explicit kind of Platonic argument here from the Philebus is that in like, so this is outdated physics in a sense, or allegorical physics or whatnot. But in us, we have a degree of earth, air, water, fire, right? In the ancient conception, like we could say we have the atomic elements composing us now. And what's greater, the fire in the sun or the fire in our body? Well, obviously, like the fire in our body is kind of derivative of the fire in the sun. So all the material components, same with earth, water, etc., like the ocean is much greater than the water in us. So the material components of our body are derivative from superior material components in the entirety of the cosmos. And so what about soul? Is that the one exception? So we have a principle of motion and intellection in us that supposedly is unlike the bodily elements in us, which are inferior and derivative from the cosmos. Instead, we have a principle of soul that is superior and totally alien to the nature of the cosmos. Is soul just a epiphenomenon? Is it totally emergent and has no basis in the underlying physical reality? I don't think so. And then there are modern physics arguments that you could give for the idea. You kind of have to ascend to the idea of absolute intellect from the world soul, because that's more proximate to us. Intellect is like pure, eternal forms held together in a mind. That is like thought thinking itself in the Aristotelian conception. But then souls, they have that essence in eternity. They're kind of made of the forms, you could say, but then their energies are in time. So the world soul is that combination of all the forms in the perfect proportion that serves as the animating principle of the universe as a whole. And its activities are obviously temporal, but it measures the greatest span of time, unlike our minds, which measure a relatively brief span of time. So you could say that, yeah, the universe has some kind of animating principle and a principle of that keeps track of relations. And there's quantum physics arguments that you can bring in here. There's an MIT physicist who's pretty well known. I forget right now his name, but he has this idea that the universe as a whole is a quantum computer. And I think quantum computing is turning up in a lot more spaces than we would have recognized in the past. Like in biological systems, people used to think that biological systems couldn't use quantum properties because they're too hot and wet and messy. And you need these like perfectly isolated systems to have quantum effects. That's obviously not true. And that's been like Penrose and Hameroff's model about quantum computation in the brain has recently been confirmed experimentally by a team, an independent team. Hameroff and Penrose didn't even work on it. So quantum effects are in the brain, quantum effects are in the body. I think they're in nature more broadly, not just in biological systems, but we have to think like, what is computation? This is a variant on Plato's argument from the Philebus, where like computation in our computers, is that sui generis? Is that a unique thing that just pops into existence, not derived from the broader cosmos? Or is the computation in our computers taking off from the background quantum, or sorry, not quantum, the background computational properties of matter more broadly? Stephen Wolfram, famous physicist, has a model that basically recreates all the laws of physics from these basic programs. So he kind of reduces everything to computation. So how fundamental is computation, and what scale can it operate at? That's within the cosmos, right? That's within the scale of like temporal operations. But then go to Gödel, right? So if we buy those arguments and we say that there's good reason to suppose that the universe as a whole, or like all matter, intrinsically has computational and thus cognitive properties, if we buy that, well, these sorts of systems, computational systems, operate, unless we're talking about quantum computation, operate on algorithms, and no algorithm can be consistent, coherent, complete. It can be coherent but not complete, or complete but incoherent. And that's because Gödel thought, so we can know truths about any algorithmically based system that can't be formally proven, and yet we can know them to be true non-algorithmically. That's the Gödel's incompleteness is done using the Gödel numbering system. And I don't want to try to rehearse the argument because it's been a little while since I looked specifically at it. But the idea is that there's truths about all of these propositions. Like this proposition in the Gödel numbering system is true or false. And there are some propositions which for intuitive reasons, we can deduce to be true, but those deductions are not within the axioms of the system. And he generalizes that to the extent where no set of axioms that produce a system of a set of behaviors in a system can be used to formally prove every proposition in it. There will always be propositions that are true that rely on types of deduction, types of reasoning that go beyond formal proof. So formal proof, algorithmic operation can't subsume mathematical truth, and nor can it, by extension, subsume mental activity, because that kind of proves that we're doing something beyond the algorithm, because no set of algorithms, no set of axioms can totally subsume truth. And yet we can access these truths because we have intuitive faculties in the sense of nous from Platonism. So dianoia is discursive reason. That's what you do in like mathematical operations. And then nous, the intuitive function, is what you use to intuit the forms. And that's at the highest level. Nous is also engaged in formulating axioms. So some people can come up with good axioms for mathematical systems. Some people have no idea where to start doing that. What accounts for that difference? It's not a set of mathematical laws that tell you how to come up with an axiom. Instead, it's experience as a mathematician that rarefies and cultivates your intuitive grasp of what constitutes a coherent mathematical axiom. So that intuitive faculty exists, and mathematicians, in fact, rely on it to generate axioms. But then beyond that, Plato says, when we kind of rarefy, and he says specifically, like, study math first to improve these intuitive faculties. And then once you're done studying math, you can start to ascend up beyond mathematical principles to the principles of form more generally. And that's where you get to like justice, beauty, these sorts of forms that are at a higher level that we have to believe in if we're going to believe in objective morality, objective like aesthetic truth. And the way that we actually get there is by these intuitions. Now, just like the argument with math, okay, where does mathematical truth exist? We know that it exists in a mind in us, and yet it's not contingent on our minds. And so therefore we should expect this broader mind to be there, which contains all mathematical truth. And also all mathematical truth is interconnected. And so that mind has to be absolute enough or vast enough to comprehend all these various mathematical truths. Because when, you have proposition A, proposition B, there are truths about the relations between A and B. And so therefore there's like sets of mathematical truth that subsume all mathematical propositions. And so there has to, if all mathematical truth has to be grounded in some kind of mental substrate, there are propositions that involve all of math, and therefore there has to be some mind out there that subsumes all the math and holds that ontologically to give us an objective ground for mathematical truth. The same applies with the forms, and that's where you get to nous itself. Mathematicals are actually at the level of soul, which is discursive. It involves temporal action. But nous, the pure intuitions of the forms, we recognize in ourselves when we get a notion like beauty, not algorithmically, but when we somehow grasp or touch or make contact with beauty itself. Schopenhauer describes this pretty poetically, like what it's like to kind of grasp the underlying form behind things. And so if we accept in our mundane experience some contact with the forms, intelligibility itself, then likewise that subsists in a mind for us. So where do the forms subsist in the broader world? Not in nature explicitly, because that's, temporal, that's in the cosmos. These things are eternal. They don't depend on temporal operations or algorithmic steps. So it's eternal. It's a mind, because that's all we understand to be a substrate of forms from our experience. So if we just extrapolate that, just like with the mathematical reasoning, there has to be an eternal mind which subsumes all the forms and dictates how their relations operate. And so there you go. That's where you get, what did you call it? Like absolute intellect?
Yeah, that's right.
Also, just to add, Karnak in chat says the physicist that you're talking about's name was Seth Lloyd, apparently.
Yes, it is Seth Lloyd.
Yeah,
yep.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Karnak.
Awesome. Wow, that was great. I love that. So, is that to go out on a limb again? Is that why there's like more of a resonance for certain languages than others? Some say Italian or Latin languages have something closer to, I don't know, like I suppose a relationship to that ultimate mind that you speak of. What you've been trying to explain to us, and its relationship to the universe and nature and ourselves.
Yeah, I don't know if that's directly entailed by what I said, but that
Okay.
is a Platonic view, because language for Plato is ultimately predicated on analogies between the sounds that we use and the things themselves. So if that's the case, there has to be a most perfect way of creating those sound symbols so that they accord with the nature of the underlying things. And you would expect there would be languages that are better at doing that at the level of like onomatopoeia, like the kind of physical sounds. And then there would be languages like maybe Sanskrit that tap more into the kind of inherent formal properties behind these metaphysical principles behind the world. And actually, there's a most perfect language, I guess, at a technical level as well. Like maybe to be a good engineer, it helps to speak German. I don't know. Which languages are best for what. But yeah, there should be these kind of ideal languages in theory.
Just to add on that, like it's actually sort of amazing how there's actually languages you're listening to, and they're just like ugly. Like, have you ever heard Indonesian? Like, it's the most ugly language I've ever heard. Like, it's amazing that that's a real language. It's just like weird guttural, like beast noises. It's sort of crazy. It's sort of a bit of an aside, but I just had to bring that up.
Abrasive, punctuated.
It's like literally hurts your ears to like listen to Indonesian, and I'd say like Chinese is probably like a close second after that.
I'm sure if you were raised in it, there'd be a certain...
but it's like there's languages you hear, like you hear Italian, you hear French, you hear German, they all sound fine. You hear Indonesian, you're like, oh, what am I listening to? It's like a verbal sewer.
Okay. Well, on that note,
Okay, no, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for that. I have certainly gotten a lot out of this. I think you're probably pretty tired after that. Yeah, that's I would love. I actually had more questions, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I understand you're a very busy man, leading the future for our people and reinvigorating everybody towards that future. So yeah, Hector, do you or do you want to take this? Should we close out or?
Yeah,
Mhm,
we'll close up. We wanted to go for an hour and a half. We've gone a bit over that.
mm, mm.
Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for those watching. Thanks for those people in chat.
Could
And
I just say?
oh, sorry. Yeah,
Oh
go
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. I'll extend an invitation to Eric here, or would you like to do that privately afterwards?
Oh, you can do it now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, you're certainly welcome back anytime, Eric. Feel free to drop drop a line, and if you want to talk about anything, we would actually love to have you come November 5th, November 6th for us. We're doing a U.S. election stream that we'll be covering. We would love to have you drop in, drop out, drop in again to that stream just to get your thoughts. We would love to have your input into that. We would think that'd be really cool if you could do that. You're completely welcome to do that. And yeah, as I said, the doors of the New Zealand nationalist movement and Endeavour News are open to you anytime, so to speak. So yeah, just extend that invitation to you. And thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, much appreciated. I'm not really a politics guy, but
Okay.
perhaps I will drop in and say what I do have to say.
Yeah, it'd be good
But
to
yeah,
have
this
it.
was
Oh,
very fun.
sorry. You.
Oh, sorry.
I was
Yeah.
just going to say it's good to have an American if we're going to be covering an American election to maybe give their thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and even you can you can graft in whatever ideas or opinions you have, whatever intuition or feelings you have about it. We're still a couple of months out, so anything that you could offer us. Clearly, you're operating at a much higher level than most, so political or not, I figure you're bound to have something good for us. So but in any case, it would kind of just be cool to have you on again anytime, and it will be cool to have you on anyway, just for that stream. So we would love to have you that, and also good luck for. I had a couple of questions on that. How you're feeling with AFPAC and
oh
what,
yeah,
what
you're invited to AFPAC. That'll be
yeah,
pretty cool. When is AFPAC? Like, it's pretty soon, eh?
Yeah, a few weeks,
15th.
June 15th, I believe.
Oh, is that why you're going to Detroit? Why is it in Detroit? That seems a bit strange. Seems like a weird place to have it.
There's another conference there that Nick is trying to steal the thunder from,
Oh,
I
is
think.
CPAC there as well, or something, or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
similar?
Charlie Kirk.
Oh, Charlie Kirk.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay, that
So,
makes
And
sense.
Trump's going to be there too. Not at AFPAC, obviously.
Oh,
The other one.
well, you never know. You never know.
you
Might be a
never know,
surprise
man.
guest.
Mhm.
You could redirect his, yeah, yeah. But no, that's awesome. Okay, so yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Eric. Would you just be able to, if we close out, would you be able to hang around for a little bit, just like a five
Yeah, a
minute?
few minutes, sure.
Oh,
Yeah,
great,
cool.
awesome, thank you. With that, I'll hand it over to our host, Hector.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in to our, where was I? To the viewers, and thanks for everyone watching the replay. You're all appreciated, and very thankful for our guest Aarvoll, our first ever guest. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and we will see you. Actually, not next week because I'm on holiday. Sometime in the near future. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye.